her request today, and I'm sure that he will be in touch. Thank you very much. We're now going to have the next statement, but before I call the Minister to make his statement, I wish to make a short statement about the House's sub judice resolution. There are relevant active legal proceedings relating to Horizon before the courts. In December 2022, Mr. Speaker exercised his discretion in respect of matters sub judice to allow references to those proceedings as they concern issues of national importance. That waiver is ongoing. However, I urge honourable members to exercise caution in what they say and to avoid referring in detail to cases that currently remain before the courts. Statement, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Post Office scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history, shaking people's faith in the principles of equity and fairness that form the core pillars of our legal system. I am very pleased that last week's excellent ITV drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, has brought an understanding of the Horizon scandal to a much broader audience. I have received much correspondence about the scandal and the emotional impact the dramatisation has had. Those of us who have been campaigning and working on the issue for some years were already well aware of what happened. I'd like to pay particular tribute, of course, to Alan Bates, his fellow postmasters, including Joe Hamilton and Lee Castleton, and to the Right Honourable Member for North Durham, my Right Honourable friend for Halton Price and Howden, the member for Telford, the member for Jarrow, and the Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw, and indeed, of course, Lord Arbuthnot, and other members of the Horizon compensation, and of course the key figures in the media. They played a key role in seeking justice and compensation for the victims. And I also thank the Shadow Secretary of State for his continual constructive approach, as well as, of course, my ministerial predecessors, including my honourable friend, the member for Sutton and Cheam. Watching last week's ITV programme has only reinforced our zeal for seeing justice done as quickly as possible. We are already a long way down that road. Sir Wyn Williams' inquiry is doing great work in exposing what went wrong and who was responsible. And full and final compensation has already been paid to 64% of those people affected. I previously said to the House that my main concern now is for those still waiting for full and final compensation and the slow pace at which criminal convictions related to Horizon are being overturned by the courts. Before Christmas, the Advisory Board published a letter which underlined exactly that. This is not just a matter of getting justice for those wrongly convicted. Overturning their convictions is also key to unlocking compensation. Each person whose Horizon conviction is overturned is entitled to an interim compensation payment of £163,000. They can then choose whether to have their compensation individually assessed or to accept an upfront offer of £600,000. That offer is already speeding along compensation for a significant number of people. In the light of the Advisory Board's letter about overturning convictions, I have spoken to the Right Honourable Member for Durham North and to Lord Arbuthnot. I have also had a very positive meeting this afternoon with my Right Honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor. All of us on these benches and across the House are united in our desire to see justice done. We have devised some options for resolving the outstanding criminal convictions with much more pace. My Right Honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, will, quite rightly, need to speak to senior figures in the judiciary about these options before we put them forward. But I am confident that we should be able to implement measures which address the concerns expressed by the Advisory Board, and I hope the Government shall be able to announce these proposals to the House very shortly. Now, of course, there is clearly great concern about the role of the Post Office in prosecuting these cases. The Post Office quite rightly decided to stop undertaking private prosecutions in 2015. If we are to make sure that a scandal like this can never happen again, we need to look at the way in which private prosecutions like these have been undertaken. Any company can bring private prosecution in this way. This is not a special power of the Post Office. I know my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, wants to give this issue proper and thoughtful consideration, and I'm sure he'll report to the House about this issue in due course. Getting justice for the victims of this scandal and ensuring that such a tragedy can never happen again is my highest priority as a Minister and has been throughout my 15 months in office. When we talk about compensation, we have to remember that the lives of postmasters and their families caught up in this scandal have been changed forever. They have faced financial ruin, untold personal distress and a loss of reputation that no amount of financial compensation can fully restore. The Government recognises, however, that we have a clear moral duty to right these wrongs to the best of our ability. To support those lives who were turned upside down by this scandal, we have provided significant funding for compensation. And we have been clear that it should not be the taxpayer alone who picks up the tab. We will wait for the inquiry to report to make clear the extent any other organisation's culpability for the scandal and for any individual accountability. Our aim is to ensure that every victim is fully recompensed for their losses and the suffering they have had to endure. To date, over £148 million has been paid to 2,700 victims across all compensation schemes. 93 convictions have been overturned, and of these, 30 have agreed full and final settlements. Just over £30 million has been paid out in compensation to those with overturned convictions, including interim payments. Of course, we want to ensure that the process for agreeing compensation is fair, transparent and is open for independent assessment. That is one of the reasons why I am today announcing that retired High Court Judge Sir Gary Hickinbottom has agreed to chair an independent panel that will assess the pecuniary losses of those postmasters with overturned convictions where disputes arise. This will bring independent oversight of compensation payments in a similar way to Sir Ross Cranston's oversight of the Group Litigation Order Scheme and the independent panel in the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. Of the original 555 courageous postmasters who took the Post Office to court and who first brought the Horizon scandal into the public eye, £27 million has been paid out to 477 claimants, in addition to the net £11 million received through the December 2019 settlement. 47 members of the original GLO group have also received compensation following the overturning of their convictions, totalling over £17 million. We have received full claim forms from 59 of those postmasters who are eligible for the GLO scheme and issued 43 offers. There have been 21 full and final settlements paid and a further 7 full and final settlements accepted. That brings the total number of accepted full and final GLO settlements to 28. I would encourage claimants' lawyers to continue to submit GLO claims because my department stands ready to review them and turn them round quickly. It is worth noting too that the 2,417 postmasters who claimed through the original Horizon Shortfall Scheme have now all received offers of compensation. Around 85% have accepted these offers, worth over £107 million. In total, over £91 million has been paid out in the scheme, with the Post Office now dealing with late applications and with cases where initial offers were not accepted. But, Mr. Speaker, this is not just about compensation, it's about restoration. The restoring of people's good names and the restoring of the public's trust both in our postal service and in our justice system. It is therefore only right that we get to the bottom of what went wrong, of who knew what and when. While the scale of the problem is immense, the Government is unwavering in its resolve to tackle it, to compensate those affected and to leave no stone unturned in the pursuit of justice. We owe that to the victims, to their families, to the memory of postmasters who have died since this tragedy first came to light, and to those who, tragically, took their own lives after being accused of awful crimes they never committed. We owe it to everyone who has been caught up in this tragic miscarriage of justice. Can I thank honourable members across this House who are supporting us in this effort. Together, we stand united, not just in memory of those who have suffered, but in shared purpose to ensure that such a tragedy can never and will never happen again. And I commend this statement to the House.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for an advanced copy of his statement. The Horizon Post Office failure has been a scandal we have been responding to for some time, but I welcome the way the recent ITV drama has brought the story to a wider audience. It is a powerful reminder of the way art and culture can be used to tackle injustice and to raise public awareness. And I would also like to pay tribute, as I have done before, to the sub-postmasters and to my right honourable friend for North Durham, to Lord Arbuthnot, and to all those members whose work has been integral in the progress to date to get justice. A lot has been done, but there is, as we all know, a lot more to do. Because the Horizon scandal is quite simply one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice in British history. Something which robbed people of their lives, their liberty and their livelihoods, driven by the misguided belief that technology was infallible and workers dishonest. The Post Office prosecuted innocent people, causing unimaginable pain and suffering which no amount of compensation can ever alleviate. Yet to add insult to injury, the journey to justice for those sub-postmasters has been mired by a great many delays and barriers. And we know some of the people affected have tragically passed away before they've ever had the chance to see justice. I would like to place on record, and I recognise the attention that this Minister has given this matter, including responding positively to, for instance, the campaign to ensure compensation payments on subject to taxation. But it is still an urgent priority to get compensation to all those affected. And it is unconscionable that convictions still remain where it is clear no wrongdoing has been committed. Justice must be served to those workers and their families, and that is why Labour has called for all sub-postmasters to be exonerated in full. I listened very carefully to what the Minister had to say about this, and I want to extend our support for any actions that may be required to overturn these convictions as quickly as possible, whilst ensuring no victim has to re-enter litigation and relive the trauma that they have experienced. I appreciate the Minister's acknowledgement that the public want to know this will happen as soon as possible. And I also welcome the review he announced into private prosecutions, because the public do want assurance that nothing like this can ever be allowed to happen again. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is right that the Sir Win Williams inquiry continues to uncover the truth. But just when it was felt this outrageous miscarriage of justice could not get any worse, more allegations have come to the fore, which must now surely be considered as a part of that inquiry. Today, I understand it has emerged that there are potentially dozens more victims from a pilot scheme. I myself have just learnt this afternoon from one of my constituents that they've only been informed very recently that they are a victim of this scandal. So can I ask the Minister again what steps the government are taking to ensure every victim is identified and encouraged to come forward? It is also clear that Fujitsu are facing very serious questions that demand a response. Those questions must be answered in the evidence sessions planned for the inquiry later this year. And if it is found that Fujitsu knew the extent of what was occurring, there will have to be consequences that match the scale of the injustice. In addition, those involved in the running of the Post Office who have received honours must be held to the high standard those honours demand. They will also have the opportunity to give their side of the story in the inquiry. But if that evidence is unsatisfactory, I would urge the Forfeiture Committee to consider the propriety of those honours and to take any further appropriate action. Mr Deputy Speaker, for many people who've watched the ITV adaptation, it will be hard to believe that this ongoing tragedy is not in fact a work of fiction. So egregious and pernicious have the impacts been on people's lives. But this isn't a TV show. It is very real, and it has had very real-world impacts. Lessons must be learned and justice must be served. I have faith that the Williams inquiry will ensure those responsible are held to account. It is right that those innocent people have their convictions overturned. As the Minister has said, not just so they can begin to turn the page on this scandal, but to ensure that it leads to the quick access to compensation they rightly deserve. However, I believe this will be just one of the many steps required if amends are ever to be made for this most insidious of injustices.
Minister.
Very grateful. Can I thank you for his kind words and support, and also the manner in which he's delivered his response to the statement. We share an ambition in terms of the exoneration. That's something we want to do, and I'm very happy to work with him over the next few days to make sure that we get into the right place. It raises a very important point on people that were involved in a pilot scheme for Horizon. This is an issue that's been raised also by the Right Honourable Member for North Durham. We want to make sure every single victim is properly covered by the various schemes, and I've asked anybody who has evidence of any kind to such effect, including the Right Honourable Member for North Durham, to furnish me with details, and I'll make sure we pick up anybody that's left outside the schemes. He mentions Fujitsu, and I concur with his points. I think anybody who is shown to be responsible for this scandal should be held accountable, including making any payments into to the taxpayers' fund for that. And in terms of the honour system, I accept what he says. As I've said before on a number of occasions, as far as I'm concerned, there is no reason anybody... I speak as a former CEO, and this isn't direct responsibility for any specific thing that happened, and the Sir Williams inquiry is there to identify responsibility. But as a CEO who's overseeing the Post Office during a critical time where things went so badly wrong, I think, as a former CEO myself, I would say it would be perfectly reasonable to ask somebody to voluntarily hand back an honour in that situation. But that's a matter for the person concerned, of course.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Can I refer my honourable friend to the article in the Howard Justice Journal of Crime and Justice, to the article by Maguire M.R. and Renault K, Harm, Injustice and Technology, Reflections on the UK Submaster's Case. It shows on page 444 the graph of the prosecutions, which rose from 10 in 1997 to nearly 80 in 2001. People responsible should have noticed that you aren't going to get ordinary decent people, sub-postmistresses and sub-postmasters, suddenly going crooked on that scale. Secondly, if the article is read, it talks about the bugs which were named after the sub-post offices where they were discovered. The Del Mellington bug, the Calendar Square bug. And can I also refer my honourable friend to the article in The Sun talking about my constituent Cheryl Shaw, who gave up in 2008. Having been losing £400 week after week, she got the post office investigators down, who claimed they couldn't find anything to explain what was happening. She had to sell out. She lost her home, took on work as a carer. She is illustrative of those who were convicted and those who gave up before they were prosecuted. There are so many people who actually now believe that the Horizon scheme was set up for one purpose, was adapted to another, but it didn't work. And when people started entering things twice, there was apparently a loss where the post office actually didn't lose any money. So if the post office weren't losing money, how could people properly be prosecuted? And the Titanic error was the belief in technology.
Well, thank him for his question and points. I totally agree with him. People should be held responsible where they're shown to have willfully neglected their duties, and that's whether through a shortage of inquiry and an investigation. He raised an important point as well about the attitude of courts towards computer-based evidence, technology-based evidence. I know that my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, is looking at that particular issue as well. It's something I brought to his attention due to the efforts of Paul Marshall, one of the leading barristers involved in this whole scandal, and he's alerted the Lord Chancellor to that particular point as well. I'm sorry to hear about his constituent, Mrs Shaw. I take it she will have applied to the Horizon shortfall scheme, which should compensate people like Mrs Shaw. If he would like any help or assistance for him or Mrs Shaw to be able to make sure that's happened, I'm very happy to provide it.
SNP spokesperson Marion Fellows.
Mr Deputy Speaker, you were in the chair on the 19th of December when we last discussed Horizon Compensation Bill, and I don't think any of us then who knew about the TV drama would have believed the impact that it has had. I think it's bittersweet that it's had such an effect. I think it's really telling that MPs, peers, media, loads and loads of people tried to bring this into the public consciousness, and we didn't manage to do that as effectively as this TV drama. I should also say thank you to the Minister for presight of his statement. Just today I've been contacted by local sub-postmasters who want to meet with me. They were never prosecuted. They had shortfalls. They paid back money to the post office. Many of them just walked away, retired, and they now have no evidence about what happened, because when you walk away from a post office, all of the financial documentation goes back to Post Office Limited. So can we have a thought about that, Minister? Can you also confirm that all this money did go back to Post Office Limited, enhance their profits, on which many bonuses over the years were paid to Post Office executives? And could we have pressure put on those people to repay these bonuses? The Minister's statement, there's very little in it I would disagree with, and I think there has to be a real consensus across the chamber on this. But some words did spring out at me, things like very shortly and in due course. Can we please have fixed timelines on when we get reports back? I want to commend Sir Wyn Williams, who I first met when he first took on the inquiry before it became statutory, and it sounds ridiculous for me to say I was impressed by him, but I really understood that he was going to get to the bottom of what has happened, and he has done that in spite of grievous failures on behalf of Post Office Limited. Mr Deputy Speaker, there must be accountability for all in Post Office Limited and Fujitsu who prosecuted and persecuted sub-postmasters over the years. And I pledge that these SNP benches will continue to put pressure on government of any colour to keep the momentum going on this, to ensure justice and that real justice is served. And if that involves more pressure on the former CEO and for people who received honours and because of the work they did in Post Office Limited. I know the Minister's nodding. I know he will agree with me.
Minister. Well, can I thank her for her questions and indeed for her work on the all-party group for post offices. Thank you. In terms of the case she raises with the postmasters who suffered financially and have difficulty providing it because of lack of evidence, well, the benefit of the doubt should clearly be with the postmasters in this situation. The Horizon Shortfall Scheme is there to compensate people in that situation. And again, if she needs any help with any of those cases, I'm very happy to assist. Whether people repay bonuses or whatever else that people are held accountable for, I think we should wait, to be fair to the results of the inquiry. I think we believe on the basis of process in this House. And it's right that people have a right to reply and give their own evidence. But I agree with her in her confidence in Sir Wyn Williams, who is doing a tremendous job. I'm sorry I can't be a little bit more precise in my timescales, but I'd be very disappointed if it went past the end of this week in terms of giving more information to the House. And in terms of the accountability of individuals, I entirely agree with her for all reasons of justice, but also act as a deterrent for anybody else who is ever tempted to do the wrong thing in these circumstances. Seeing these corporate failures and corporate abuse, it just cannot continue, and we need to make sure people realise if it happens, they'll be held to account.
Sir David Davies.
Can I start by congratulating the Minister and his immediate predecessor for the sterling work they have done in attempting to bring justice to this problem. But the government needs to do four things. It needs to stop the Post Office unnecessarily challenging the victims' appeals and find a more rapid method to exonerate all of the innocent victims. To instruct the Post Office to stop hiring expensive lawyers to challenge the compensation claims and therefore to accelerate the payment mechanism. to strip away the Post Office's right to police its own cases, and to accelerate the investigatory procedures prior to criminal prosecutions of the real villains in this case, which of course are, well, we know who they are. Does the Minister believe he can achieve those four aims in months rather than years?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his kind words, also all his work in the campaign for justice for postmasters, and I can also congratulate him on his recent knighthood himself. The whole of Yorkshire are rejoicing at his award. But I can assure him on all four counts, yes, we want a more rapid means of overturning convictions. Yes, we want to make sure the Post Office doesn't challenge unfairly any attempt to overturn those convictions. Yes, in terms of making sure the investigatory process happens more quickly. Of course, some of these matters are outside our control, as you're fully aware, the separation of powers. But in terms of the actual policing of cases, I'm happy to talk to him probably after this statement in terms of what precisely he means by that. I think in terms of the way the compensation schemes are running, there is independent elements to all that. They are not being policed or not being restricted by the Post Office themselves. There are independent panels or independent assessment as part of all those processes. But very happy to talk to him in detail about what we can do in those areas.
Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Byrne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Justice delayed is justice denied. But 85% of the convictions have still not been overturned. Yet it was last spring that the Select Committee warned that the process was rolling much too slowly and made recommendations for speeding it up. Many of those recommendations were rejected. Yet tonight the Minister has told the House that it is only now that the Lord Chancellor is exploring with the judiciary a way of speeding things up. So, can the Minister give us tonight what is his time frame for delivering justice to those who have been unfairly convicted? Those who are still awaiting their convictions to be overturned, can they expect justice to be done this year, or must they wait until many more of them have tragically passed away?
Minister.
Well, I can thank him for his work and his obviously work on as chair of the Select Committee. I'm very happy to be appearing before his Select Committee next week to answer more detailed questions in these areas. He's right to say that most convictions haven't come forward, exactly why we're making this statement today. More people with convictions to have them overturned. They haven't come forward was a difficulty, and some people, around 50 people, have come forward and not had those convictions overturned. Looking at both those particular issues, very happy to talk to him about any of his recommendations. Yes, absolutely, this year we want to see these issues resolved. We want to see all compensation payments done, as we've said before, by August, which is the original time frame for that. Not all these matters are within our gift. We do require, obviously, victims and victims' representatives to bring forward claims, of course, and those seeking to overturn convictions to bring forward, the current process is to bring forward applications to overturn those convictions. That's the process we're trying to expedite. I hope to have some very good news for him in the coming days.
Sir John Redwood.
As one who for all too many years has urged faster compensation and redress for those who have suffered in this, I welcome the new sense of urgency and united purpose across the floor of the House. But when he is looking at this issue of the Post Office's right to bring private prosecutions, would he understand that it's because they were 100% government-owned and accountable through this House to the government that it gave it so much more seriousness and much more weight against the innocent who were trying to defend themselves?
Minister.
I think he makes a very good point, and I think that definitely played a part in this in terms of their ability to take forward prosecutions. It's something, as I said before, my right friend, the Lord Chancellor, is looking at across the piece, but not least in connection with the Post Office. As I said in my statement, they haven't taken forward any prosecutions, private prosecutions, since 2015, I think it's highly unlikely they would try to, even before things might be changed.
Kevan Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his statement and declare an interest as a member of the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board. Can I also say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we need more TV dramas because it's had a remarkable effect on the attendance of this House tonight. But the drama was successful because I think it spoke about the victims. Now, many of us who've been involved in this for many years have met many of them. I know the Minister has as well, and his predecessor, and knows the torment which these individuals have been through. So I think it was excellent in doing that. The key thing now, and as Alan Bates said at the weekend, we need to get the compensation out the door as quickly as possible. Can I welcome what he says on overturned convictions? We, the Advisory Board, did make recommendations on this, and I think they should. All the 927 convictions do need quashing. Can I ask him whether or not we can consider this on Wednesday at our next meeting, and what timescale he's looking at? And on the issue of the pre-Horizon scheme that's now become evident, which the Honourable Member for Stalybridge referred to, can we get this bottomed out very quickly to find out, one, how many cases there are, how many were prosecuted? I know at least of 2, so we can actually get justice for these individuals as well. And can I just say, if anyone thinks there's not people out there, I've had 3 people this afternoon contact me and spoken to them. So, you know, there are people out there, Minister, we still need to reach out to.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, absolutely. I think the documentary totally captured the type of people we are talking about here, and people who have met the sub-postmasters are already aware of that, but also perfectly highlighted the brutal approach of the Post Office in these matters and the desensitised nature of it. So I think that's part of the reason it's created the kind of situation we've got today, which we welcome, because they're keen to deliver this and get the support for it across the House and across the nation. Thank him for his work on the Advisory Board. I certainly hope to attend that meeting on the Advisory Board on Wednesday and share some of our thinking at that point in time, exactly what measures we are proposing. He raised a very important point about the pilot scheme, people that were affected by the pilot version of Horizon. We believe they're still covered by the compensation schemes, and I think he agrees with that as well. We want to make sure those people have been reached out to. And say, if he, as we spoke about this morning, if he identifies or if he shares the details of those people with me, we'll make sure that they have been contacted, and if not, why not, and what other people might be in a similar circumstance.
Sir Robert Neill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the sense of urgency that there now is on all sides of the House about this. Will my honourable friend bear in mind 2 points in taking this forward? Firstly, that it is critical that we speed up the means by which these improper convictions are overturned. But will he bear in mind that this will place exceptional strains, unprecedented strains, upon the appeal system and the criminal justice system, and that would, if we follow the normal route, require unprecedented resources to be put in? Will he make sure that he works closely with the Lord Chancellor to take on board the ability of the judiciary actually to cope with this volume being put forward? And secondly, on private prosecutions, can I ask him perhaps to revisit the recommendations of the Justice Select Committee in 2021, that, for example, all private prosecutors should be subject to the oversight of Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Service to ensure there are proper standards of independence and objectivity in dealing with cases which were clearly lacking in this case?
Minister.
Well, can I thank you for his work. Yes, we share the ambition to speed up the whole process, and I can also thank him for the work he's done with the Lord Chancellor. I know he's spoken to the Lord Chancellor and he mentioned his work and his conversations with him at our meeting earlier today. We're aware of the resources issue and the timescales around looking at individual cases. So it's something we're very much taking into account in terms of solution we hopefully will arrive at. But also the private prosecutions, again, the Lord Chancellor is equally concerned about that, and I thank him for his work on that. And again, the conversations we had today very much centred around his work on the Select Committee and his recommendations.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister just referred to the brutal approach of the Post Office, and it struck me that this was another example of what Bishop James Jones referred to in terms of the Hillsborough inquiry when he talked about the patronising disposition of unaccountable power. And I wanted to say, in relation to my own constituent, Janet Skinner, whose conviction has been quashed, she hasn't received any compensation to date. And I just want to know from the Minister, can he put a firm time on when she will start to get that compensation paid to her?
Minister.
Can I thank her for her work on this? And indeed, in terms of Mrs Skinner, all people who are in any of the three schemes, of course, get access to an interim payment. If Mrs Skinner has had a conviction overturned, she's entitled to an interim payment of £163,000. From then, she can take two courses, two routes. She can either go for a full assessment, which does take more time because these issues are complex, assessing financial loss and detriment relating to things like health, of course. So it does take time, but so our commitment is anybody who goes down a full assessment route will have an offer made back to them within 40 working days, or 90% of that's our target for doing that. The alternative, she can pursue the fixed sum award of £600,000. There's no need to compile a claim to do that. That money can be paid out pretty much instantly. That's not a route for everybody, but it has been a route for a significant number of the 30 people who have decided to settle, who have had overturned convictions.
Paul Scully.
Deputy Speaker, 4 hours of compelling storytelling has brought a fresh wave of interest, of anger and frustration to people around the country and indeed this chamber. It's great to see so many people supporting the sub-postmaster's plight. Now, I know my honourable friend has been working diligently at this for 18 months now, so he needs no reminder that first Aston on the statement, on the story, this story is true. Will he work diligently to build on his work to make sure that the judiciary allow a blanket quashing of all of the convictions so that they can get to the Treasury to make sure that the funding is there to give full and fair compensation, that they can get the Post Office to make sure that they can adhere to his timetable of August 2024. And then obviously I know Sir Williams needs no reminder about his work that he's doing excellently in the inquiry to get those answers. Will my honourable friend agree with me that the best way he can do this is to remind all of those people is that we are all human first, politicians second. This is human cost.
Minister.
Well, can I thank him? And he says he's building on my work. Can I say I'm building on his work, which I think he's done a tremendous job in the role he played within this when this issue first came to light. But we share that ambition. We share that ambition to do something that that expedites the process of overturning convictions. I think the time for quibbling is over. It is a case now of action this day and delivering that overturning convictions. Clearly we want to do that in a way that doesn't cause us any constitutional problems or legal problems across the system, but nevertheless that is something we believe we've got a solution to. We should be able to give more details in due course very shortly, and also the key work that Sir Williams is doing is playing a key part in this as well. And I thank him for establishing that statutory inquiry, which is going to lead to so many answers that people quite rightly demand.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has heard from me previously about the difficulties faced by the executors of my constituent who was a victim of this scandal and who had subsequently died. Ultimately, the difficulty for my constituents was that she had been putting in her own money to make up shortfalls, and they didn't therefore know how much they should settle for because the Post Office themselves had no idea what the proper sum ought to be. So in these circumstances, what can the government do to ensure that every victim of this scandal gets the full compensation to which they are entitled?
Minister.
Well, I can thank him for the work he's done on behalf of his constituent. I'm so sorry to hear she has passed away, and certainly I have a similar situation in my constituency. Sam Harrison of Norton near Helmsley, who sadly passed away last May before she'd received compensation too. It is a tragedy. Of course, as he knows, compensation will still be paid to the executors, effectively probably to the family. So it's not about any saving of money, but nevertheless, we still want to accelerate the process. I totally agree with what he's saying in terms of the lack of evidence in some cases, some of these cases being 20 years old. And as I said earlier, in those situations, of course, the benefit of the doubt should be with the victim in terms of making sure that settlement is as generous as possible, can be assessed as generously as possible and paid out as quickly as possible.
Dame Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for his statement. He's said a great deal already. But actually I want to pay tribute to those postmasters who have fought for justice, including one of my constituents who was part of the 555 that undertook the group-led litigation. Now, the Minister has said quite a bit today already, but can he give some insights into the steps that will be taken to review the actions and accountabilities of Fujitsu, and with that the culpabilities as they are still awarded contracts week after week across government? This entire scandal has demonstrated acute institutional state failure across state institutions that has to be acknowledged. So can I ask what review will take place of the corporate governance actions of the Department of Business overseeing its shareholder responsibilities towards the Post Office during this period, and therefore what changes can proceed around the governance and the accountability of the Post Office?
Well said.
Minister.
Well, can I thank her for a question, and I share a wish to pay tribute to the postmasters who have obviously campaigned so long but also effectively on this particular issue. And I read with interest her piece recently over the weekend in terms of what she thinks should be done. I agree with much as what she said. As I said earlier, anybody who's responsible at a corporate level, albeit individually, should be held to account, and that may include payments made, of course, to assist with compensation and indeed contracts that certain companies may be awarded. Certainly, we think that it's right that we let Sir Win Williams undertake his inquiry, report properly, assign blame. We should take action, whether it be against corporates or against individuals at that point in time, and make sure both of those bodies are accountable.
Barry Gardner.
The Minister said this is not just about compensation, it's about restoration, and that is true. But is it not also about misfeasance in public office? So will the Minister confirm that the maximum penalty for a public servant who willingly and knowingly acts in a manner that results in harm, injury or financial loss to an innocent party is life imprisonment?
Well, I mean, he raises a very important point again on accountability. We have given Sir Williams a chance to look at all these issues and determine accountability, individual responsibility. I've dealt with a number of different scandals over the years, from the backbench as well as in my ministerial role here, and I think they happen all too often at a corporate level for us to simply carry on in the way we have done in the past. So I would very much happy to take away his points in terms of the potential penalty for the offence he describes, and something I'll discuss with officials and others.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, anybody who cares about the interests of justice in our country will be horrified, not just at the nature of these miscarriages, but at the sheer scale of them. And does that not beg a very important question, Madam Deputy Speaker? This is an unprecedented set of circumstances, and in my judgment it requires an unprecedented approach, and that should be legislation on the floor of this House to deal with the convictions of this huge class of people who are not just not guilty, they are victims themselves. And can I urge upon my honourable friend and my honourable friend the Lord Chancellor to look urgently at the question of legislation that I know will be supported in this House to create a presumption of innocence that will cut the Gordian knot and support the victims and their families who are enduring this horror for too long.
Minister.
Okay, thank you for his question and for his work on this, and I appreciate the engagement he's had with the Lord Chancellor. As you say, this situation is unprecedented. Certainly legislation on the floor of the House is something we discussed at length today in a meeting with the Lord Chancellor and officials. He'll be aware that my respected friend the Lord Chancellor is speaking to the judiciary about these particular matters. He may want to do the same, make his feelings known to make sure there is there's no barrier to making sure we can legislate in the way he describes.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sometimes with hindsight, it's possible to see that mistakes were made and that an injustice was carried out. But it beggars belief that at the time, the Post Office and Fujitsu and ministers believed that people who were trusted pillars of society suddenly turned to be mass group of thieves plundering millions of pounds from their employer. And surely those who at that time were observing this must have known something was wrong, yet they spent hundreds of millions of pounds persecuting and prosecuting people who were innocent and who have suffered intolerably. Can the Minister assure us that those who were guilty of negligence at that time, or perhaps even worse, cynical abuse of their position, will be held to account?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him? Every debate I've been involved in, this is a backbencher as a minister he's contributed to, and he's paid close attention to this all the way through and demanded justice. Yeah, as I said before, the approach from the Post Office was brutal and gratuitous and shocking. Should people be held to account? Absolutely. I don't think we can start to dissuade people from taking these wrongful actions, disgraceful actions, without a deterrent, and certainly holding people to account by whatever means possible, including potentially prosecutions. That would be a significant deterrent on people doing this kind of thinking of doing this kind of stuff in the future.
Tim Lawton.
Can I very much welcome the approach of the Minister, but also pay tribute to the work he did before he took on this role in raising the profile of this whole issue. This is a scandal of historic proportions, and heads must roll with or without gongs attached to them. I am only aware of one sub-postmaster in my constituency who was pursued by the Post Office, not convicted, but then it struck me that's because I have very few sub-post offices left. Are there grounds for investigating whether or not the Post Office used this dodgy accounting to mismanage the profitability of individual branches to accelerate the closure programme of many of those branches, which left, in many cases, us with very few Post Office branches left for our constituents to use?
Minister.
Can I thank him for his question and for his work also? He raised a very important point. The motivation behind the actions of the Post Office and executives and managers within the Post Office is something that certainly Sir Williams is looking at as part of inquiry. Very interested to see the results of that. There is no sense that was the case that I'm aware of, that this is just another method of trying to contribute towards the closure of a Post Office. And indeed, despite the closures he has experienced, that's principally around some of the general nature of the impacts on high streets of changing shopping habits, which is causing difficulties for some of the network. We are determined to try and make sure the Post Office network itself is more viable and more sustainable. Individual businesses, that is as well, and things like the banking framework, a more generous deal on the banking framework between banks and post offices in terms of the remuneration they get to manage the access to cash, for example, is one of the ways we can make these post offices themselves more sustainable. We are fully committed to maintaining a significant network across the country, currently set at 11,500 branches.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was referenced earlier on in this terrible scandal that, of course, many people are coming forward and more are coming forward since the drama. But there are a small proportion, of course, who haven't come forward. And I know that the Minister has been his department have been trying to track down some of those who are eligible for compensation, including writing to members of this House. Can he say what support the department is going to provide in terms of forensic person and indeed company search to try and track down all of those who are eligible but may have simply become so exasperated or exhausted that they walked away and didn't want to have anything further to do?
Yeah, it raises a very important point, and we've written, for example, to all the people with convictions to say, please come forward. I think there is, as well as, so it's not a lack of ability to identify the individual. A lot of it is the confidence of those people to come forward in the first place after what they've been through. We hope making it easier to overturn a conviction and making it easier to access compensation will encourage more people to come forward. As he said, there are people who come forward. I have had people come forward directly to myself since the ITV programme was aired. So we think that's what we're doing, and what's been done already is helping with that, but there's certainly more we need to do to be able to convince people it's the right thing to do and they can be confident of good treatment when they come forward.
Caroline Noakes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, many people who were running post office branches weren't actually victims themselves, but were left demoralised by what they saw happening to their colleagues, to people across their network, and quietly gave up what had been their livings and in some cases their homes. Can the Minister give any indication if there is going to be support to enable those people to come forward and give their story and ascertain whether they might also be eligible for compensation because they felt forced out by the lack of care the Post Office showed to them?
Well, she raised an interesting point. It's one I'm happy to take away. Certainly the Horizon Shortfall Scheme should compensate anybody who was affected by this scandal directly and also affected not just financially but also in terms of other issues, non-pecuniary issues that they faced and they suffered from. But it's something I'm very happy to take away and see what information we might have in that particular area.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my Edinburgh South West constituents have emailed me over the last few days because they too watch the very powerful dramatisation that we've all seen. What they want most is for the Post Office and individuals within it to be held to account, as other honourable members have said. Does the Minister agree with me that, looking to the facts of what's happened here, some of these people may very well have claims for malicious prosecution? And where evidence has been withheld or lies told in court, then the police should also be looking at whether or not there has been perjury and whether or not there has also been, very seriously, a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, which would, of course, carry with it an extremely hefty prison sentence.
Well, she's right to point out about malicious prosecution, and that does form part of the compensation package available to people who have convictions. But in terms of offences that might have been have people are guilty of or may be guilty of, in terms of different things that happened that led to these particular issues, of course. We expect the police or other enforcement agents to look at this very carefully, and there's nothing to stop them bringing forward prosecutions where they can see people would be guilty of a certain offence.
Sir John Whittingdale.
While applauding the extraordinary courage and resilience of the sub-postmasters who have campaigned for justice for so long, does my honourable friend agree that the makers of Mr Bates versus the Post Office and ITV represent public service broadcasting at its very best, and that without that we would not be having this statement this afternoon?
Okay, thank you for this question. I entirely agree with him. It brought it into everybody's living room, and I think many people, although they're vaguely aware or even very aware of the scandal, didn't see the real effect of other people in terms of both the what kind of people that were affected, but also, say, the brutal way in which they were bullied and in which they were then forced out of their businesses and their livelihoods, and sometimes, and I think on 200 occasions actually put in prison. So, but it did a fantastic job. And I think we should pay tribute to ITV and its producers and the actors concerned, but also to the many journalists, not least people like Nick Wallace, of course, Tom Witherow, Carl Flinders, who brought this issue to light in the first place into the public consciousness, which I'm sure played a part in the decision for the producers to produce that particular programme.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also would like to pay tribute to the Minister for the work that he's done and all those people he mentioned when he started his statement. The horizon is just not sound to base any criminal conviction on, and we have to recognise that and accept that now. My constituent was one of the original 555 under the group litigation order scheme. His conviction was overturned, so he's now seeking full compensation in the overturned convictions scheme. But he's one of 3 cases where the Post Office say that there isn't a public interest in pursuing his case, and that Horizon wasn't intrinsic to his conviction, yet the figures that were used in his conviction were produced using Horizon. This is a Kafkaesque situation to be in, and it cannot be allowed to stand. The Post Office should not be anywhere near who gets compensation and what compensation they get. They should be removed from the process. They've been shown to be incapable and untrustworthy of dealing with this in an even-handed way. Does the Minister agree?
Okay, thank you. And again, he's somebody who contributes to virtually every debate or every statement on this particular matter, and thank him for his work on it. I agree with him in terms, and indeed, we agree with him that the compensation schemes agree with him that the Horizon evidence shouldn't play any part in terms of whether somebody is guilty or not. There are obviously different schemes: the Horizon Shortfall Scheme, the Group Litigation Order Scheme, which people who have who are part of the 555 sub-postmasters who took that forward. Can I just clarify the 40-day target for response to any claim is under the GLO scheme, not the overturned conviction scheme, although we're equally ambitious to provide rapid offers in people who bring forward claims for overturned convictions. He raises the very important point about public interest cases, and something again we discussed today with the Lord Chancellor, and making sure that everybody affected gets fair compensation, and that we want the Post Office to have as little influence in these cases as possible. So we ideally deliver something completely in terms of overturning convictions and access to compensation completely outside their jurisdiction.
Hello, Gerardina.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's progress that £27 million of compensation has now been paid to 477 of the 555, and that 47 of the GLO group have received compensation following the overturning of their convictions, totaling 17 million. But my constituent Joe Hamilton does tell me that it is still far too difficult and that people are still being far too easily messed around in this process. So will he look again at how he can make it even easier, even simpler, and much clearer for people to be able to claim their full and final compensation?
Yes, that's exactly what we're attempting to do. And I met with Joe Hamilton, a wonderful individual, and somebody who is incredible, obviously incredibly tenacious, but you know, her whole disposition, you would never guess somebody who'd been through the trauma that she has. She's a wonderful individual. Yes, we accept at the moment it's not as rapid as we would like it to be, either to overturn a conviction or in terms of compensation. That's exactly what we're looking at for some time, but not least over the last few days. Good conversation today. We hope to have some clearer and better news for him in the next few days.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement and also for his work on this issue. Like so many of us, I represent people, two of whom I've been in touch with again today, whose lives were destroyed by this outrageous injustice. On their behalf, I urge the Government to provide swift and fair compensation and for the immediate exoneration of all who bear the crushing and unjust shame of accusation and conviction. This scandal has also, though, created outrage and disgust amongst serving postmasters who were not themselves victims and maybe post-date this scandal, but who simply do not wish to be associated with an organisation anymore that can treat people the contemptible way that they were by the Post Office. Does he recognise this is a moment of real crisis for the Post Office network, such that two of my postmasters, one of whom has already resigned, one has threatened to resign for this very reason? So will he instruct the Post Office to go above and beyond to support the network and to support postmasters and potential postmasters, so we still have a Post Office network at the end of all this?
Well, I agree with him on all his points. Swift and fair compensation, absolutely. An immediate overturning convictions is something we're looking to achieve as soon as possible. If that is possible, clearly subject to the caveats I said earlier in my remarks. Despite what clearly the Post Office has done itself, I think most members of the public still look at the Post Office with the network with great admiration and great valued in our communities. So I do not believe it's a damaged brand. But it's absolutely right that the postmasters have a much better relationship now between the Post Office, the central management at the Post Office and the network itself. Much work has happened in that area, including recruitment of 100 area managers to try and improve that relationship. That relationship will also be improved, I say, by making the Post Office, individual Post Office branches more financially sustainable. You know, something he and I have discussed, and we're very keen to do that, both things like the banking framework and the new parcel hub opportunity for those postmasters. But we see the Post Office network has a bright future and a sound reputation, and we're very keen to reinforce that reputation.
Mark Horsey.
We've already heard about the work of the Business Committee in looking at this issue in our report of February 2022, when one of the most distressing features from our evidence sessions was hearing about the many people who were affected but weren't willing to come forward because it was too painful. They wanted to put the matter behind them, and as we've heard from the scene in the drama, the post office was just not trusted. It led to the committee's recommendation that there should be a trusted point of contact for people to go to. Will the Minister, with me, welcome the news today that I think 100 new people have come forward, and will he do his utmost to encourage everybody who's affected to come forward and claim the compensation that they're due?
Yes, absolutely, and can I thank him for all his work on the Select Committee. I know he's a very long-standing member of that. Now, we are very concerned about people who won't come forward for whatever reason. We think the best way to tackle that is to make it easier to get compensation. That's one of the reasons we brought forward the fixed sum award route for overturned convictions, so there's no requirement to submit a detailed claim to access that £600,000, but also to make it easier generally to overturn the convictions by making those two routes easier. We think that's the best way to convince people to come forward, and certainly the message should go out loud and clear from every member of this House to the people who are affected. Please come forward. You will be treated fairly. You will be compensated quickly.
Barbara Keeley. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm raising points raised by constituents who've been moved by the ITV drama on the Horizon scandal. And I want to reiterate the point made by my honourable friends and the honourable members opposite about the value of a drama like this one to bringing home the extent of the scandal to a much wider audience. And I want to congratulate all of those involved in making the drama and the investigation work that went into it. Can I add my voice to that of my honourable friend on the front bench in supporting the review of private prosecutions? The power which allowed the Post Office to be a supposed victim, investigator and prosecutor. Finally, my constituents are deeply concerned about the delay in paying compensation for victims. Can the Minister expedite those payments in any way he can?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful. I too share her point that the dramatisation was absolutely invaluable in raising awareness, but also in terms of making sure we bring forward measures as quickly as possible to all the things she mentioned. Again, the issues such as private prosecutions, as I said earlier, is something discussed with the Lord Chancellor today, and he's keen to look at in the context, the general context of private prosecutions, and that's something, again, I'm sure he'll report to the House in due course. I agree with her entirely in terms of delays. We want to expedite this process of overturning convictions and paying compensation, make it much quicker, much easier. That's the best way to resolve these issues and make sure as many people come forward as possible and are confident to do so.
Jane Maria Miller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and following the series on ITV last week, I've been contacted by many of my constituents who welcome the Minister's focus today on justice for every single victim. But he knows already that despite the efforts of himself and many other ministers, the Criminal Cases Review Board has said that many of the 700 people who've had criminal convictions won't take part in a further legal process, perhaps because of their understandable collapse of trust in the Post Office, but also the judicial system. So now is the time for the government to consider how all convictions that relied on evidence from the Horizon system, which must now be seen as unsafe, could be quashed without victims having to endure further legal wrangling.
Minister.
Yeah, thank you. She raises very important points. It's exactly the experiences so far. People won't take part, and the CCRC can only do so much. People will not, of course, despite the fact that the Post Office now look at every single case and will write to people when they're not going to contest an appeal. So they've tried to be more proactive in terms of making sure that people come forward. But she's right. I share her ambition. Ideally, we would like a process that does not require a convicted postmaster to come forward. Something we could do across the board. That's exactly what we're looking at, and we hope to have some news for you in the coming days.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for his statement and, of course, pay tribute to the sub-postmasters who have led the campaign. Concerns over Horizon have been in the air for at least 14 years. That's 14 years of pain, injustice and uncertainty for the victims and their families. Is it not time this government enacts decisive action to both identify victims of Horizon and to mass exonerate those convicted?
Minister.
She raised, of course, a very important point. That's exactly what we're trying to do, and that's exactly what this statement is all about. As I say, we've compensated 64% of victims thus far, full and final compensation, and provided interim compensation to practically everybody who's come forward with a claim. But she's right to say that we're disappointed more people haven't come forward to overturn the convictions. That's exactly what the problem we're trying to solve, and we're looking at innovative legal ways to do that. But as I say, we hope to have some news for her very shortly.
Sir Edward Lee. I'm
glad that the Minister is asserting the principle of ministerial responsibility, which has been very clear even since long since the Critchell Downs case, where even the Minister isn't personally responsible, he actually is responsible for what goes wrong. And when I was Minister of the Post Office, that was made clear to me, and I think it's reprehensible that at least one of my successors is trying to dodge the bullet in this way, just say I was given the wrong advice. If we own the Post Office, the Minister is responsible, and that is a principle we have to establish. Now, looking to the future, I've often been in touch with this Minister regarding the views of David Ward, who's the President of the Sub-Postmasters North East Branch. What they want now, looking forward, is a line to be drawn under this. The compensation to be paid, the reputation of their post office re-established, and from now on, the post office management to treat sub-postmasters properly.
Well, I totally agree with him. As ministers, we must bear responsibility for what we do, as well as expect people within the post office to bear responsibility, and Fujitsu and other people. And as ministers, we must serve a useful purpose. In terms of the issue he raises about drawing a line under this, I totally agree with him. That's exactly what we want to do, and there's two ways we do that, is overturning convictions, but also paying full and final compensation. Pleased to say those with overturned convictions, around 30 people now have been able to draw a line under it by being compensated fully for what's happened to them in the past, which is something we should try and build upon and make that happen much more quickly, and that's certainly what we're working on right now, and hope to deliver those solutions in the very near future.
Andrew Quinn.
Thank you. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and also for the work he's doing to push this issue to a conclusion. I want to pay tribute to my constituent, Della Robinson, who was the sub-postmistress at Dukinfield Post Office in my constituency. She was convicted in 2013 of false accounting. It has been quashed as part of the 555, but she lost everything. She lost her shop, she lost her home, she lost her friends, and she lost her reputation. Look, heads have to roll, because people were in the know at Fujitsu and at the post office. And whilst I'm not somebody who seeks retribution, heads really must roll in this case because of the lives that were destroyed. A daughter of Denton, Paula Reynolds, really ought to do the right thing and hand back her CBE.
Minister.
Well, can I, on behalf of the Government and the Post Office, apologise for what's happened to Della Robinson. These are tragic cases, as he says, not just losing your shop, your business, but also your home, and the respect of your local community must have been devastating for her. Clearly, she's got a route to compensation now, having overturned the convictions, either immediate route through the fixed sum award or the detailed assessment. If it's the detailed assessment, we're keen to make sure that's delivered as quickly as possible and puts Della, or Mrs Robinson, I should say, back in the position she was before these actions of the Post Office. But I agree with him, as I said earlier. People individually must take responsibility, and the Sir Win Williams inquiry is there to identify who was responsible, exactly what they did or didn't do, and how that contributed to what happened to this scandal, and where possible, those individuals should be held to account by any means, including by prosecutions. But certainly it seems an obvious opportunity in terms of people who have received honours for service as the Post Office to return those honours voluntarily.
Sir Julian Lewis.
If individual employees of the Post Office do indeed face serious criminal charges for malicious prosecution or indeed criminal conspiracy, how would the Minister feel if it turns out then that the Post Office proposes to pay for their legal defence costs, given the way it treated its own sub-postmasters?
Well, I wouldn't feel good about that at all. It's a very important point, and we should take it away and take advice on that. But that wouldn't seem to me to be the appropriate thing to do at all.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 19th of August 2008, my constituent Michael Rudkin, in his position as chairman of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, visited Fujitsu's headquarters at Bracknell and inadvertently witnessed IT engineers there secretly altering the accounts of sub-postmasters in Horizon. When the managers at Fujitsu realised what my constituent had seen, they ejected him from the building and he travelled back to his post office in Ibstock, where his wife Susan was his office manager. Mr and Mrs Rudkin, the next morning, were subject to an early morning raid by Post Office's inspectors, who declared that there was a £44,000 deficit had appeared on their computer overnight, and criminal convictions resulted. I never believed it was a coincidence that the Post Office found this massive deficit shortfall on my constituent's computer the same day that he uncovered what Fujitsu were doing. And when I challenged Fujitsu, they said that Mr Rudkin had never been to their premises and they'd lost the visitors book for the day in question. My constituents want to know who's going to be held to account for more than a decade of false incrimination and humiliation suffered by my constituents.
Well, can I thank him for all his work on this? He's been a constant contributor to these debates and making sure we see justice on behalf of his constituents and the wider cohort of people affected by the scandal. Mr Rudkin was one of the stars of the show, the dramatisation, of course, and so sorry to hear what happened to him and his wife in terms of that, in terms of the Post Office's action. It seems incredibly coincidental that those two things coincided, the visit to Fujitsu, what he discovered at that point in time, and then what happened the next day in terms of discovering, I think, a £44,000 shortfall in his accounts. And we all know, now know, of course, that Fujitsu, or the Post Office itself, were able to amend the Post Office account itself. So it does seem incredibly coincidental. But also, as I said, brutal and cynical in terms of what might have happened. I think we should let Sir Win Williams determine exactly what has happened, who's responsible, before we judge blame. But I'm just as keen as he is to see individuals held to account for what happened in this scandal.
David Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I echo the point made a few moments ago by my right honourable friend, the member for Witham. The Horizon computer system, which has been the cause of so much misery to so many postmasters and their families, including my constituent, Mr. Alan Bates, was supplied by Fujitsu, which continued to be paid to maintain it. Fujitsu also are the recipient of contracts, multi-million-pound contracts from many public bodies, including government departments. Indeed, recently have had contracts awarded by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, the Home Office and HMRC. Can my honourable friend say why a company that has been the cause of such distress to so many of our fellow citizens continues to be the beneficiary of public sector contracts?
Well, can I once again pay tribute to his constituent Alan Bates, who was very much the star of the show in terms of the dramatisation and the reality of this situation, because of his tenacity and his commitment that this has come to light. In terms of the Horizon IT system that's in there, it is being rebuilt. Fujitsu are not the people rebuilding it, and so the Post Office will move away from the current system of Horizon, but they need a system today to cover that, one of the largest networks, retail networks in the world. So we do need to make sure they have a system they can use right now, but that will be replaced outside Fujitsu's what will no longer be Fujitsu's responsibilities. In terms of other government contracts, it's something we're looking at, of course. Our view is that in terms of whether it be contributing to compensation or whether it be access to government contracts, we should let Sir Will Williams complete his inquiries report on that, and then make a decision who exactly was responsible, what happened, and then we can make a decision on exactly what we do regards organisations or individuals at that point in time.
Kate Osborne.
I want to thank the Minister for this statement and for recognising the work that I and others have done to highlight this scandal over many years. Of course, the recognition should go to the many sub-postmasters, including my constituent, Chris Head, one of the 555, for their tireless campaigning for justice. And I want to pick up on the point from the member there. Last October, I asked the then Minister if, in light of the Horizon and sub-postmaster scandal, he would pause existing contracts with Fujitsu and undertake a review. And I'm pleased to hear, if I heard correctly, that that's what is currently happening. My call is to pause existing contracts, to stop awarding them with multi-million-pound contracts. Fujitsu continue to take billions in profits, including 10 billion per year in government contracts, whilst our sub-postmasters await compensation. So will he agree to stop awarding Fujitsu contracts? And can you tell me how many contracts have been given to them since this scandal came to light?
Minister.
Well, I can again thank her for her work on this, and both in terms of her work in this House, but also when we engage on particular issues, her and others who are taking a particular interest in this scandal, and also to her constituent Chris Head, who's a regular contributor to me on Twitter about different things on this, which I read all the time. So he gets his message across very effectively. In terms of Fujitsu, be clear about it. We think the right process is that we use a Sir William Williams inquiry. It's a statutory inquiry to identify exactly who's responsible, what they're responsible for. At that point in time, we decide whether it's right to give any organisation access to government contracts. That's the right process, we feel. Of course, we have concerns about what's happened in the past and concerns about that particular organisation, but we think we need to follow a process in order to make a decision on how we move forward from there.
Neill O'Brien.
Does my honourable friend agree that we should create a special legal process to more rapidly overturn these wrongful convictions, to accelerate compensation, including for those who haven't come forward? And will he take steps to stop the Post Office prosecuting, to stop them fighting victims in court? And does he agree that it would be right for Paula Reynolds to hand back her CBE, given her role in this disgraceful miscarriage of justice?
Well, I'm tempted to answer yes, yes and yes. But yes, we want a rapid legal process, and that's exactly what we're discussing today. Keen to deliver that as quickly as possible. Post Office have stopped prosecuting, haven't prosecuted since 2015, but and looking at the wider aspects of private prosecutions, again, something the Justice Secretary is looking at. And my thoughts on Paula Reynolds are exactly the same as his. I think there is a perfect opportunity now for Paula Reynolds to hand back voluntarily her CBE, but also from that further down the line, when we understand where the Sir Williams inquiry is able to assign certain blame, there's other potential avenues you can take or could be taken at that point in time.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think one of the most chilling parts of the dramatisation is that dozens, if not hundreds of people were being told this is only happening to you. You're the only one who's reporting a problem with this system. Now, it's safe to assume that someone or some individuals oversaw and dreamt up that particular corporate spin. So can I push him further, and does he agree with many in the House that the government now need to recover the bonus payments paid to those executives who oversaw that corporate lie?
Well, I agree with his description. It was a chilling, the dramatisation, the broadcast was chilling, and not least that part of it. I think it made you feel physically sick when you kept hearing those words to individual postmasters. It's only happening to you. Very disturbing, and clearly that must have been a corporate position. But I do think, and I share his ambition in terms of what he regards as sanctions, and there may be other sanctions that are applicable. But I do think we need to follow a process, particularly when we're talking about individuals, The best route for that, we believe, is the inquiry. Sir Win Williams inquiry should identify who's responsible and hold those people to account for what they did.
Anna Firth.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Minister's statement and his hard work in this area. Like many others, people have written to me. They will welcome the Minister's statement today that he supports removing the CBE from the former CEO of the Post Office. But would my right honourable friend agree that actually removing a gong does not deliver justice, nor does compensation? And it's not a question of retribution, it is a question of justice. And would he agree, therefore, that if Post Office employees have erroneously accused others of wrongdoing, whether negligently, recklessly or deliberately, they must feel the full force of the criminal law that they wrongly imposed on others?
Minister.
Well, thank you for a point. Just to be absolutely clear, I am not taking the position we should remove the CBE. It shouldn't be our position we remove it. I think because we haven't yet assigned blame to individuals, I think at this point in time, as a former CEO of this critical period, I think it would be clear where the Post Office failed in so many different areas, in so many shocking ways. I think it would be sensible and reasonable for the former CEO to hand back an honour that was given for services to the Post Office. There may be other avenues. You're quite right to identify what those potentially might be. We think that Sir Win Williams' inquiry is the best way to identify who's responsible. It is, I agree with her comments, this isn't about retribution, this is about justice. And I think for people I've spoken to, some of the victims of this scandal and others, there are two things they want. They want compensation, clearly, but they want people to be held to account. And I absolutely share our ambition to do so.
Dame Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, we've all been appalled by the way that the Post Office went on and on for so many years, prosecuting and ruining the lives of sub-postmasters, and it certainly makes us ask who knew what. And as the Minister said, we want to ensure that the scandal of this type of thing can never happen again. So perhaps he'll understand how disappointing it was that the government stopped short in December of agreeing to introduce a Hillsborough law which would ensure that victims can get disclosure of crucial information and place a duty of candour on all public servants. So will he now talk to ministerial colleagues about reconsidering that decision?
Minister.
Well, we are very keen to find out who exactly knew what, and that's the Sir Win Williams inquiry. That's why it was made a statutory inquiry, so they can get access to all the information. There is nothing they shouldn't have access to, and all the disclosure should be available to that inquiry, which should lead to people being held to account and other avenues explored in terms of what might be done at that point in time, the evidence that's uncovered. She raises a point. I'm not particularly aware of the particular issue she raises about the potential to support something in December. I'm very happy to look at that and take that away.
Douglas Ross.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Horizon scandal is exactly that. It is an appalling scandal that potentially could still be continuing today, but for the commitment and dedication and efforts of a small group of people who were determined to get the truth. And I hope one of those, Alan Bates, can finally accept the honour he deserves, but he will only do that when Paula Reynolds does the correct thing and either hands back her CBE or is rightly stripped of it. But looking at the wider convictions, in Scotland, the prosecution of individuals rests solely with the Crown Office, and criminal case reviews are a devolved matter. So what discussions has the UK Government or the Lord Chancellor had or planning to have with the Scottish Government and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service to ensure Scottish victims of this scandal get the justice they deserve?
This question, and he's right to say, Alan Bates has said he won't accept his OBE until Paula Reynolds is not, her CBE has been withdrawn, and that's another good reason I think for handing that back, that CBE, because it would allow Alan to be recognised quite rightly through the honours process. He raised a very good point. In short, we're keen to make sure anything we do is UK-wide, not just England-based. So those conversations will, I'm sure, take place. The conversations we've had with the Lord Chancellor really only happened today, of course, and getting to a position that would resolve this situation and meet the requirements of the Advisory Board and others across this House. So that's a conversation I'm sure will be going on between the Lord Chancellor and his counterparts in other parts of the United Kingdom.
Bromley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been written to by many constituents in recent days expressing their horror at the extent of this injustice, and indeed outrage that honest, innocent sub-postmasters such as Mr Noel Thomas were not only convicted but also imprisoned for a crime they did not commit, indeed a crime that had not in fact happened. They will be very glad to hear some of the actions outlined by the Minister, not only to accelerate the exoneration of those wrongfully committed, but also the payment of compensation. He also referred to those who are impacted by this scandal, but who might not have been convicted themselves. I have one sub-postmaster in my own constituency who, for the pressure and the fear of conviction, paid up for a shortfall that had not actually occurred. Do we have firm information and a grasp of how many sub-postmasters and former sub-postmasters might find themselves in that position? And is it not perhaps for the Post Office now to reach out to those individuals to ensure that they do come forward for compensation?
Yeah, okay, thank him for his points. And yes, as I say, we're keen to exonerate more people more quickly. That's exactly what we're intending to do, and we've been looking at today, and hope to give more information as quickly as possible. So quicker, easier exoneration, and also easier compensation. And that's exactly the opportunity that the scheme for overturning convictions delivers. People can take a more detailed assessment route, which does take time to compile and respond to a claim, or they can simply move past that system and just take a fixed sum award of £600,000. That's available to anybody who's got an overturned conviction. So it should encourage more people to come forward. In terms of other people who have got shortfalls, who haven't been convicted, there's a Horizon Shortfall Scheme. There are 2,417 people that have applied to that scheme within the timescale. There's also about another 500, I think, that have applied after time, but have still been accepted into the scheme. So anybody in that position should have access to that compensation. 100% of people in the original cohort, the 2,417, have had offers. 85% of those people have accepted. So we are making significant progress. So if he's aware of any postmaster, and so that it should all be communicated and written to any postmaster affected who hasn't been, I'm very happy to work with him to make sure they can access compensation.
Philip Hollowbone.
This is a scandal in the history of the Post Office since it was first established in 1660. 1660 was the year of the Restoration after the English Civil War period, and in that same year, 1660, Parliament passed an Act of Oblivion which exonerated all those who had previously opposed the Crown and facilitated through Parliament a blanket royal pardon. Might not this sort of mechanism, together with swift compensation, be the most appropriate way to bring justice to all the affected sub-postmasters?
Well, I'm going to say his knowledge of history is greater than mine, but the essence of what he's saying is exactly something we concur with, whether it's through the route he mentions or other routes. We are keen to make sure that we can make it easier to overturn convictions, ideally without a postmaster having to do anything. That's something we're looking at now, but again, we need to have conversations with the judiciary, other elements of the system, to make sure there are no intended consequences of what we're doing, in terms of precedents, for example, but that's our ambitions are exactly the same.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, following on from the honourable member, I think it's the chair of the Independent Advisory Group, Professor Chris Hodges, who is also suggesting that a simple piece of legislation could be introduced to the House which would ensure pardons en masse and quickly. But could I ask the Minister particularly about compensation for those bereaved families where the former postmaster or mistress took their own lives?
Thank you for a question, and again pay tribute to the work of the advisory board, including as chaired by Professor Chris Hodges, Professor Richard Moorhead on there, James Arbuthnot and Laura Arbuthnot, and the Right Honourable Member of North Durham, doing fantastic work, and I hope to attend their meeting on Wednesday where we can discuss some of these issues. In terms of bereaved families, a further tragedy, of course, that people, and I spoke earlier, I've got a constituent myself who's exactly, their family's in exactly that situation. The same amount of compensation should be made available to the family. I know that's it's called comfort for many people in that situation, of course, but it's the least we can do to make sure at least some compensation is paid to the family who will have been affected as well by this scandal.
Richard Graham.
There is one aspect, Madam Deputy Speaker, that hasn't been touched on yet, the role of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. Mark Baker, a former sub-postmaster, was elected to the Executive Council in 2001. He later gave written evidence to the Business Select Committee in March 2020, saying that the NFSP had been aware of the issues with Horizon for many years, but effectively successive CEOs had been compromised by a grant funding agreement with Post Offices Limited. Can the Minister, whose own determined persistence on this I much admire, can he confirm that the role of the NFSP is being looked at by the Williams inquiry? Because, of course, this should have been the union that spoke up for the sub-postmasters, and I suspect there are many lessons to be learned, as well as finding out who knew what in the NFSP.
Well, he raises a very important point, and I do engage with the NFSP, Cam Greenhow and others. I think there is a better relationship now between the network and the NFSP, but that's important that it is a representative relationship. But nevertheless, he raises a very important point. There is nowhere the statutory inquiry cannot look in terms of identifying responsibility for this, and he points them in a certain direction that I'm sure they'll be aware of, but they may well have listened to his comments on the floor of the House today, and something they may look at as a consequence of that.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Only last year, when the sheer scale of this scandal had already been uncovered, the CEO and senior post office leaders were awarded tens of thousands of pounds in bonuses for their work on the inquiry into post office failings. Meanwhile, some of the victims of the scandal have died while waiting for compensation. This has outraged my constituents, constituting, as it does, incompetence and insensitivity on stilts. The Minister today has committed to ensuring and expediting justice for the victims of this scandal, which is widely welcomed. But what steps is he prepared to take to ensure the recovery of all bonuses paid to post office leaders in full?
Well, certainly in terms of what she regards as the sub-metric, the work of the Post Office in terms of contributing towards the inquiry, we do accept that shouldn't have never been the case. All the people who had received bonuses at senior leadership level have voluntarily returned the bonuses that were attached to that sub-metric. But I share the point she raises in terms of the number of people who have passed away waiting for compensation. That is a tragedy in itself. Over 60, we are keen to deliver compensation as quickly as possible and make sure that at least those people who have the families of those individuals who passed away do get access to compensation as quickly as possible.
Angela Richardson.
Deputy Speaker. In April 2022, I was contacted by a former Guildford constituent, sub-postmaster Abdul Safa Abdeen, through his wife Vanessa, both now located in Sri Lanka. Between 1999 and 2005, they spent thousands of pounds settling shortfalls, including selling a property in Sri Lanka. By the time news of compensation reached them in Sri Lanka, the scheme had closed. Can my honourable friend confirm that those who have been impacted, who now live abroad, are able to apply for compensation?
Well, can I thank you for the question? I'm sorry to hear what's happened to Mrs. Abdi. But certainly, I assume she's talking about the higher shortfall scheme. Very happy to work with her and officials to make sure any late applications are considered. It sounds like that's one of those late applications. Very happy to take that and work with her offline on it.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for the work he's done and the constructive statement. In terms of Fujitsu, when can we expect those to be made accountable and actually pay significant compensation to those that have been affected?
Well, thank you for his words. And we shouldn't prejudge the outcome of the inquiry. It's a statutory inquiry. We should respect the processes it's undertaking. It's due to conclude later this year, and we hope for a report very shortly afterwards. At that point in time, we should be able to determine who's responsible and what action is taken to make sure those their actions are properly dealt with in terms of individual responsibility or in terms of corporate responsibility, which may include contribution to the compensation funds.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What the excellent TV drama brought home to millions of people was what I and many members of the House already knew, the trauma that it brought to individuals. But on a wider scale, Madam Deputy Speaker, it surely means that the government must look again at the accountability of many of these arm's-length agencies which are operationally independent. The governance, management and ministerial responsibility needs looking at, and how members of this House can hold them to a proper account.
Yes, I agree with his point. Accountability is a key part of this. I know in our own department, I think it's fair to say we've learnt lessons in terms of some of the governance. I spend a lot of time meeting with the Post Office itself and indeed a representative on the Post Office Board at UKGI to make sure we have better oversight, proper oversight of these arm's length bodies. I think he's probably referring to something wider than the Post Office, other arm's length bodies as well. And he raises a very important point that we should certainly give consideration to.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand how complicated it is to calculate the compensation to individuals and the like, that my constituents, numbers were just disappearing off screens as transactions were being put through. As a result of that, will the Minister ensure that more resources is put into those calculations and supporting that process in order that compensation can be paid more expediently?
Thank you for her point. And she's absolutely right. These are complex matters, and there's two kind of ends to the compensation journey. One is the compilation of the claim by the claimant, which may include legal advice, of course, may include assessment of health conditions, for example. So it can take time to compile a claim. Once the claim has been compiled, certainly in the GLO scheme, the most recent scheme we're rolling out, we have committed to responding to 90% of those claims within 40 days. So it certainly should, we believe we've got the right level of resources at our end to make sure we can respond fairly and quickly. And those are independent, of course, those panels, the assessments done at the response side, at the compensation side, by independent individuals and panels. So we think it's a good process, we think it's resourced properly, but of course it's something we'll continue to give proper oversight to.
Peter Alders.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Up until today, no existing or ex-sub-postmaster in the Waveney constituency had been in touch with me. Today I've received 2 emails of constituents whose lives have effectively been destroyed. This raises 2 questions. How many people were simply bullied and intimidated into keeping quiet and paying up? And secondly, what justice and recompense will be available to them?
Well, although it's tragic to hear anybody who's been involved in these kind of cases, it's good to hear people are coming forward who have been affected, and that's one of the added benefits of the dramatisation, is people are more willing to come forward, and we've seen a good number of those so far. So his constituents are very happy to make sure he's pointing in the right direction and making sure those people have access to the appropriate scheme to get compensation, because they should be compensated to the degree for their non-pecuniary losses, for any impacts on their, for example, their health or any distress or reputational issues, but also in terms of their financial situation, as we return to the position they were prior to the detriment taking place. And we're keen to make sure his constituents get access to those schemes.
Kenny McCaskill.
As both a defence agent and indeed as Justice Secretary, I was aware that even a postie who failed to deliver the mail, let alone a sub-postmaster who stole the mail, faced a custodial sentence. That was viewed as correct, and I accepted it, because there are occupations where probity is essential and where exemplary sentences will require to be imposed. But this is worse, and it is wider. This is a conspiracy to silence. It is a conspiracy by those with reputational financial interests to bury the little person and indeed to obtain convictions. They knew convictions were coming. I believe that the integrity of our justice system and indeed of our society requires that nobody is above the law, and indeed that where such actions take place, exemplary sentences are imposed. Will the Minister seek to ensure that?
Well, that's exactly what we want to do, and that's why we set up the statutory inquiry, to try and identify culpability and responsibility, and whether that leads to corporate sanctions in terms of contributions to compensation schemes, or individuals who might face prosecution or other sanctions, then that's absolutely right. And of course, there'll be different agencies looking at different things, including, of course, crime agencies, but also the Honours Forfeiture Committee may look at these different things the inquiry uncovers as part of its process. So very keen to make sure that happens. He mentions financial incentives. As Charlie Munger once said, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome, and I'm sure that played a part in some of these terrible mistreatments of postmasters.
Dean Russell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've stated previously in this House, the Horizon scandal was an absolute travesty. And my thanks, as should all of ours, go out to Alan Bates for all his relentless work to stand up for victims. And they were victims of one of the worst miscarriages of justice this country has ever seen. So whilst I'm very, very aware of the legal complexities and the challenges around righting these wrongs as we go through the various stages, would my honourable friend, who I know is passionate about getting this right, confirm that he's working at the very highest level of government to ensure that any blockages, any delays, any stutterings in this process are absolutely cleared through? And may I also ask him if he agrees with me that every single Member of Parliament here today, all 650, and every Member of Parliament for the future, make sure that they don't only watch the ITV film or drama series, but also read The Great Post Office Scandal by Nick Wallace, which originally helped shine a light on this appalling scandal.
Well, can I first thank him for all his work? As one of my predecessors, he was an excellent Postal Affairs Minister for all too brief a time, I think it's fair to say, but he did a great job, and I know some of the things he put in place in this particular area are important to this whole process. Of course, we are working at the highest level. The Prime Minister has taken a personal interest in these matters, so absolutely, I don't see any barrier in terms of a willingness to right these wrongs from anywhere in government, right to the highest possible level. So meeting the Justice Secretary today, we hope for some positive way forward in the next few days. And I completely agree with him. All of us should watch that documentary to learn lessons about this particular scandal, but also the potential for future scandals based upon the same kind of motivations. And again, he talks about the Great Post Office Scandal, written by the excellent journalist Nick Wallace, who's been such an important part of uncovering the truth to this horrendous scandal.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Harjinder Singh Batoy, my constituent, not only lost his business, lost his home, was bankrupted, but also had the agony of being convicted to 18 months in prison for something that he knew he had never done. Justice for Mr Singh Batoy isn't just getting him the compensation he still waits for, but it is seeing those who sat by, knowing that he was the victim of an injustice, and watch him go to prison, face justice themselves. So whilst it's absolutely crucial that the statutory inquiry takes on all the information that it needs to, it is important we get justice as quickly as we possibly can. What can the Minister say about how we can ensure that the importance of getting all the information doesn't mean this process goes on for years and years and years, as other miscarriages of justice we've seen in the past?
Well, tragic to hear what's happened to Mr Singh Batoy, and thank him for his work in terms of drawing awareness to that particular case. As I said before, there are two things that I think people in these situations want: rapid compensation and holding to account of people responsible. Those are the two key things, and those two things we're very keen to deliver. Make it easier to overturn convictions, and once you have overturned a conviction, I think as Mr Singh Patoy has from what he was saying, then access to immediate compensation or rapid compensation, which we can deliver through the fixed sum award or through the full assessment route, but also making sure we hold people to account. The Sir Williams inquiry is responsible, of course, to identify exactly what went wrong, who is responsible, due to report later this year. It's not something we want to carry on for years. We want to give it the time and breathing space to do its job properly, so we don't want to put any artificial limits on its ability to do that. But we hope it will certainly terminate its inquiry this year, end its inquiry this year, and report shortly after. And we're very keen that any actions can be taken against organisations or individuals at that point in time.
Vaughan Bailey.
Deputy Speaker, as my right honourable friend knows from meetings and debates, my constituent postmistress Nicola Arch moved me to tears when she described the public shaming and abuse that happened in our usually kind Stroud constituency at the time of the scandal, and her grown-up child has only ever known her as the post office lady fighting faceless corporations and losing their house and jobs in the meantime. Now, there's no one type of victim in the way they were treated or their losses. This makes this hellishly complicated, and it is really difficult to compile evidence. Will my right honourable friend use the national energy that is now behind this case to work with his excellent officials, and they have worked incredibly hard on this, to simplify the schemes yet further? So, for example, where you've got the 600,000 lump, could you do that at other levels that requires limited and defined evidence so that the people are not absolutely exhausted by years yet further?
Yeah, I thank her for the question and her work on behalf of Nicola Arch, which again is one of the most prominent cases that in the scandal. She's right to say it's complicated assessing loss, and that's exactly why I worked with officials. And I agree with her description of officials. They're excellent officials who are just as passionate about delivering compensation as members of this House. So that's something we're working on a daily basis. She's right to say the fixed sum award for overturned convictions did simplify that very significantly, and a significant number of the people who have got full and final settlements on overturned convictions so far, the 30 people, have chosen that route. But I hear what she's saying in terms of a simplified process in other areas of compensation, and we're certainly something we're working on looking at wherever we can.
Dr. Rupert Hutt.
Deputy Speaker, ITV and the Power of Drama deserve our praise for galvanising government action far faster than questions in here I've been asking since 2020. As well as Mr Bates, there was Mr Patel, who was forced to give a false confession to avoid prison. He had the humiliation of attending my constituent Varchas's graduation electronically tagged. And despite his conviction being quashed in 2020, he's had zilch compensation and suffered huge ill health. So I wondered if the Minister can sort that, make sure heads roll, and also make good on Paula Reynolds' promise to me in 2018 when she pulled the plug on Acton Crown Post Office that we will get one again, because we're still waiting.
Well, thank you for a question, and I work on behalf of Mr Patel. Well, clearly, if Mr Patel's conviction is overturned in 2020, he should have received £163,000 in interim compensation. That should be made available to anybody with an overturned conviction. Mr Patel can also access two routes that go down two routes from that. At that point is the fixed sum award, £600,000, or they can go down the full assessment route. So whatever level of compensation Mr Patel and his advisers think he is due, he'd make a decision based upon that. But certainly one route is undoubtedly quicker than the other due to the complex nature of assessing claims. But I agree with her in terms of people being held accountable, as I said in my statement, and to other members of the House. Certainly, and I'll pick up the point on Acton Post Office. I doubt Paula Reynolds has she doesn't have very much influence over that anymore, but certainly we can ask questions on her behalf in terms of that particular situation.
Derek Thomas.
Deputy Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've met with two constituents who are at the heart of who have suffered from the Horizon scandal, and what struck me when I met them, this was when I first became an MP, was the utter betrayal they felt, but also how also the fact that they lost a job that they loved, a form of public service they saw it serving their community for many, many decades. So I welcome everything that this Minister set out today on future action. But can I push gently back against the Minister who suggested that the network is in a very good place today and that there was no reputational damage? I've got two large towns, Porthleven, Newlyn, Lards Village, where we cannot get a business to touch the post office. And can he do more work to try and restore the reputation of the post office so that people have the services of these postmasters and postmistresses where they need them?
Well, thank you for his question, and he's right to point out the public service nature of being a postmaster, and I think that's another thing that came across loud and clear in terms of the ITV broadcast was the great passion and the fact that people like, for example, Jo Hamilton, great store she set by her role within the community and the service they provide to that community. So it's not just about losing a job, it's losing our place in the community. And so he's right to draw attention to that. I think in terms of the reputation of the post office, I think it's important we resolve these situations quickly now, overturning convictions, getting compensation out the door to all people affected by the scandal. That's something we're working every day. That's one step towards that. I think the post office network itself is still revered across the country, the post office network. So I believe it still has a strong reputation at an individual level. But it's absolutely right that we make actually the network more sustainable, more viable. That's one of the reasons that will attract more people into being this company sub-postmaster if it's more lucrative to do so. That's something we're working on all the time, and things like the banking framework and the parcel hubs are opportunities for the postal office network going forward.
Kirsten Oswald.
Madam Deputy Speaker, many constituents have contacted me looking for swift and straightforward action, and I'm very interested in what the Minister has outlined. I think it will be important that we see further flesh on the bones as we progress and very quickly. I would like to hear more from him about how he thinks we can best deal with those hard-to-reach cases, people who may have walked away absolutely scunnered and significantly out of pocket, who may not come forward without concerted action, and I think they deserve that action. Can I also put to the Minister that I think that the protracted nature of this issue has dampened people's enthusiasm for taking on a post office. I don't think that we can shy away from that, and our communities deserve us not to do so. In my constituency, the post office in Neilston will close on Saturday. That's billed as a temporary closure, but it's only temporary if someone will come forward to take it on. Too many communities in East Renfrewshire, and I know further afield, do not have post offices, which are essential. What can be done over and above what he said? I take on board what he said, but much more is needed to make sure that people have the confidence to take on these post offices that our communities need so much.
Well, thank you for her question. And she's right. Exactly what I want to do is make the compensation schemes more swift and straightforward, make the overturning of convictions more swift and straightforward. She absolutely is right to point to the fact that some people are reluctant to come forward in the first place. That's why we're keen to deliver a solution that doesn't require some postmasters to come forward for us to overturn the conviction. That's something we've been looking at and members of the House have been calling for. So that's something we're working on right now. In terms of rural post offices, for example, and I represent a rural constituency myself. The government does provide significant financial support for those rural post offices, around £50 million a year. We're determined to restore the reputation of the post offices through this work, but also make them more financially stable generally by increasing the remuneration opportunities for those postmasters. We think that's a good route to make sure people will come forward and run post offices in these rural locations, and that's just as important to me as it is to her.
Paul Howell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I apologise, but it's obviously going to be repetitive at this stage of the process. But the actions of the governance of the post office have just been absolutely incomprehensible. And there's going to be many people who will only have seen this and realise what's happening on because of the ITV documentary. And I encourage them all to come to me or any other MP if they don't know where to go to on this. I first engaged with it as a member of the Base Select Committee along with other colleagues back in March 2020, and it shocked me then as it shocks me now. I think the most shocking aspect to me was the fact that it's been repeated from across the House, the number of people that they told were the only one. and the cover-up and the obvious cover-up that's gone on from people within the post office to deliver those statements it's wrong, it's shocking, it's outrageous. And can I just encourage the Minister to do everything he can to make sure that they feel the full force of the law and make sure that the sub-postmasters who are the real victims feel like they've got some justice at the end of this outrageous situation.
Well, can I thank him for his questions, and I could just reassure him that repetition is no barrier to contribution in this place, as he will recognise. I also thank him for the work in terms of he has done on the Select Committee, hugely important. Those words, "you're the only one," time and time again in those dramatisations, those words were said. It was horrific. And it was a blatant lie, clearly, and somebody must have known it was a blatant lie, and those lies led to some people going to jail, other people suffering other forms of financial detriment and detriment to their health and their families. And should prosecutions flow from that, wherever possible, I would say yes.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Of course, I share the thoughts of almost everyone here. There's been almost cross-party unanimity on this issue. But I am worried still about the ongoing treatment of sub-postmasters and their liability. In 2018, my local post office was subject to an armed robbery. They were hauled up to regional office where they were interrogated. They felt like criminals. They weren't allowed to bring CWU, their union reps. They were told that they had to bring NFSP reps only, which of course they had no trust in. And in the end, whilst they were found, of course, not to have given over the money unwillingly, they left and they handed over the post office to someone else. There is a problem with the liability of sub-postmasters, and particularly the fact that the Post Office has closed Crown post offices which wouldn't have such liability. Will the Minister go away and re-look at the way that liability works for sub-postmasters? And of course, I echo the calls that we re-look at private prosecutions. The RC said that the private prosecutions process in this country is haphazard in their 2020 report. They said the fact that the government doesn't even know what private prosecutions are going on because there is no central register is a detriment to the very reforms that the government might need to take on. So will the Minister look at least having a central register of private prosecutions and a regulatory overview, possibly, of the Crown Prosecution Service? It was, of course, created for that very purpose, to separate prosecutions from the police. Now we need to do that for other public services as well.
Well, thank you for raising that very troubling case. I'm very happy to look into it on his behalf if he'd like me to do that, because it does sound troubling. I do feel, it's 2018 I think you said that case, and I do feel there's been a change in relationship between the Post Office and the network. I'm not saying it's universally good or universally supported by the network, but I think there has been some improvement, including the recruitment, as I said, of 100 regional managers, so that there is a more relationship-based approach to the network and the Post Office Limited. In terms of private prosecutions, as I said earlier, it's something I think we should look at in the context of this particular scandal, but also the wider connotations of private prosecutions. That's something the Justice Secretary is committed to do. I'm sure he'll report to the House in due course, and I'm sure he'll take on board the very important recommendations of the Justice Select Committee on this particular matter.
James Sunderland. Mr Speaker, the Minister has provided the House today with what I see as three key assurances, namely that compensation will be paid quickly to all victims, that wrongful convictions will be overturned, and also that those responsible, whether they're from the Post Office, from Fujitsu or elsewhere, will be held to account, ideally with criminal prosecutions. But does he agree, and can he reassure my constituents in Bracknell, that a judicial system which presided over so many wrongful convictions will also be reviewed?
Well, thank you for his comments. He's right to say it's exactly what we're seeking to deliver: rapid compensation, rapid and fair compensation. Is also seen to be fair. An easier route to overturning convictions. That's something again that we are determined to take forward, and individuals held to account. I think he raised a very important point in terms of the judicial system, and certainly potentially the trust we place upon computer records which I think certainly seems to have played a part in this particular case. It's something, a lesson we potentially need to learn across the legal framework, and I know it's something the Justice Secretary has in mind.
Alan Brown.
The Speaker, the Minister is aware it's not just those that were wrongly accused and convicted. There's also those that were falsely accused, wasn't prosecuted but still had consequences. I have a constituent who believes she was a victim of Horizon false accusations. She lost her post office franchise as a consequence, but the pressures associated with that led to her losing her main business as well. Can the Minister confirm she would be eligible for compensation? How does she go about accessing compensation? And for other similar victims who sadly have died, how does the deceased family access compensation for those that had false accusations without prosecution?
Okay, thank him for his contribution. There are three compensation schemes for good reason. It's not ideal to have three different schemes, but there are. We are where we find ourselves. The Horizon Shortfall Scheme, the Group Litigation Order Scheme and the Overturn Conviction Scheme. I think it sounds like his constituent should fit into the Horizon Shortfall Scheme and should be able to apply to that. So certainly very happy to make sure that he is aware of the route that his constituent can take. That, in assessing financial loss, of course, consequential losses are part of that assessment, and it sounds like there is a case for consequential loss in that particular case, but that certainly can be something that financial compensation can take into account. In terms of deceased families of deceased individuals who are affected, they can still claim to the same compensation schemes and should be compensated in exactly the same manner to exactly the same degree.
Miller.
The building on Queen's Road, Craigadon, in my constituency, where Alan Bates served the community as sub-postmaster, is now a charity shop. It's one small reminder of the damage that has been done to lives and livelihoods across the country. I welcome the Minister's statement. I welcome his tone. And I welcome the progress that the government is making. But I also know that he has seen the interim report from the inquiry, and he has heard what I think is the mood of the House this evening, that a great scandal requires a great response. So does he agree with me that in addition to prompt payment of fair compensation, that now is the time to consider legislation for the overturning of unsafe convictions, that now is the time to consider the powers of the Post Office, and that now is the time to consider also Fujitsu's status as a government or as a framework provider for government contracts? And does he agree that we need to see justice where actual wrongdoing has occurred, and soon?
Yeah, I mean, I share his, I pay tribute to work he's done on this, and I share his, his ambition in terms of delivering. This has been a great scandal. We need a very significant response to it. So our discussions today with the Lord Chancellor were very much along the lines of this is potentially doing something that is unprecedented in this particular space, and that's something we are working on right now. So I hope to give him something more definite in that regard in the coming days. In terms of Fujitsu and individuals, again, that's something we think absolutely is right. The inquiry is given time to ascertain exactly who did what and who didn't do what, and whose responsibility it is for the scandal. And that's something that when the inquiry reports in due course, which should be conclude by the end of this year and hopefully report very soon after, we should be able to make decisions on those areas at a point in time. And certainly our prosecution authorities should be able to make decisions with a clearer sight of the information, the evidence that's been ascertained.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Minister very much for his commitment, clear commitment, dedication to this. I think we're all very impressed with the fact that the Minister wants to find the solutions and the way forward as well, and we recognise that within this House on both sides of the chamber. Can I commend the ITV drama that clearly illustrated the impact on the ordinary, normal, as they said themselves, the little people, the wee people. of the brutality that the Post Office Horizon scheme had on good people so badly wronged. So for all of us in this chamber, as elected representatives, we're here to speak up for those people badly wronged. And having seen some of the horrific effects, and one in particular, a young 20-year-old girl who was imprisoned under the defective scheme and her entire life marred by that system, I'd again seek clarity as to the possibility for the Minister to not simply oversee a vital and necessary reimbursement scheme, but an official pardoning scheme to have these records wiped in England, in Scotland, in Wales, and for us in Northern Ireland, as a only MP here at this moment in the chamber from Northern Ireland, wish to see the same justice and compensation for those people as well. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank him for his contribution and also his kind words. I mean, that came through, and there was the most shocking part of it, I think. Even though I was very familiar with all the detriment postmasters had experienced due to this scandal, but I think brutality shown by some of those post office managers in the dramatisation was just inconceivable. So I completely share how appalled he is by what he saw in that programme, and anybody who hasn't seen it should certainly watch it. In terms of something that we're doing across the board, in terms of overturning convictions, that's something we're looking at very closely. We're determined to do that, something not just for England but UK-wide, and something we should be working with devolved administrations on to make sure we can do something right across the PSA, because although there were different prosecution authorities in different parts of the UK, in Scotland for example, the Post Office seems to have been involved in the compilation of those files in every part of the United Kingdom, so it makes sense to have a scheme that covers every part of the United Kingdom.
Dr Neill Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and for all his efforts on this issue over a very long period? And can I echo his tributes to all those who've campaigned on this issue for many years? The Post Office Horizon IT scandal was an outrageous miscarriage of justice and affecting so many innocent postmasters and their families. Many constituents have contacted me to express their concerns and their outrage over this miscarriage. Can my honourable friend reassure me again and the House and indeed the country that this government will do all it can to compensate all the victims as soon as possible, including looking at exonerating them all collectively, so that this wrong can be made right both swiftly and compassionately?
Minister.
Well, thank you for his contribution, and I too heard many of my constituents write to me appalled at what happened, outraged at what has happened. Again, we should pay tribute to the people behind a programme who brought this to the public's attention. I agree with him. We are looking for a process where all victims can be compensated quickly. We've got compensation schemes in place already. 64% of those affected have been compensated. But certainly in terms of overturned convictions, a collective exoneration is something, again, we are looking at and seeing what's legally possible. And that, of course, would then open the door to compensation, rapid compensation, immediate compensation of £600,000 for people who choose that route. The full assessment does take more time, and people would have to choose what's the right route for them, of course. But it should deliver all the ambitions that he sets out.
Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This disgraceful scandal reached every single part of the country, including in Scotland, where the Crown Office held prosecutorial power rather than the Post Office. And in 2020, the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission identified 73 potential victims, of which to date only 16 have come forward. There clearly still is work to be done to get the message out to people that they are entitled to have their conviction looked at. And of course, this only reaches the people who had a conviction in the first place, many of whom affected by the scandal actually never had their case taken forward but still lost their reputation and their livelihood. Today, the First Minister of Scotland has said that he will look at a mass exoneration of these convictions. I think that's the right approach, and I wonder if the Minister will confirm that that's something he and the Lord Chancellor will take forward in England, because what we need to see across the whole of the UK is a system where everyone understands what's going forward next, and also so that no victim anywhere in the country that was affected by this scandal is left with justice not served.
Minister.
Well, again, I share his ambitions in every different part of his remarks, and we too are disappointed we've not had more people come forward to have their convictions overturned. A number of different reasons. Those people have been written to several times by different bodies, including the CCRC. We're keen to get the message out, but we don't think that's a whole part of the problem. We think there's a confidence issue with some of those people wanting to come forward after so many years, after what's happened to them. So we're very keen to say to them, you will be fairly treated, you'll be dealt with as quickly as possible. A mass exoneration scheme, as he describes it, is something we are looking at, but I can't confirm today on the floor of the House. But certainly we think that that kind of blanket overturning of convictions, together with a rapid compensation scheme, will mean more people get access to justice more quickly. It's something we're very keen on, and to deliver UK-wide, which I think would be the absolutely right thing to do.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a former sub-postmaster, last week's drama obviously brought up many emotions from my time when I served from 2014 to 2019. 5 times in this chamber I have mentioned Fujitsu, and 5 times I have asked about their involvement. And now we know, finally, that they had a backdoor into the live system. So, Minister, when will Fujitsu face justice for their utter incompetence in all of this? And how can they be made to contribute compensation to the many postmasters' claims instead of the taxpayer who are not responsible for this scandal?
Well, can I thank him for being a constant contributor to this debate, of course, and he brings real-life experience to these matters, which we very much value and appreciate, and very happy to keep up our regular engagement in terms of these particular issues. And he's not shy of informing me of different things I need to be aware of, and I appreciate that engagement. Of course, the back door into the post office sub-postmaster's account, which seems to have been a key contributor to this scandal. And that seems to have been Fujitsu who had that back door. How much of that was Fujitsu's own doing that unilaterally, or was the instructions of Post Office were yet to establish? The inquiry is there to establish those kinds of, give us those kinds of answers. The inquiry is committed to concluding its inquiry by the end of this year and reporting shortly after. At that point in time, we will know who was responsible for what, and then we should be able to identify who can be made responsible in terms of potential financial contributions, rather than the taxpayer alone having to pick up the tab for this very significant compensation package. So I'm just as ambitious as he is to make sure that those responsible pay for what they have done.
Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to pay tribute to the ITV drama, and many constituents have written to me about how powerful it was, and also to the BBC's podcast, The Great Post Office Scandal, that I listened to a couple of years ago. Horizon is accounting software, yet at every turn it seems that it lacked the very principles of accounting that those who study the fundamentals in accounting recognise. Where were the checks and balances in the system? And why did the governance of the Post Office also lack the same checks and balances? It appears that no reconciliations were done to cross-check the software, and the principles of integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care were clearly not applied to this critical software in the very way that accountants are held to in the Code of Ethics. So, after many years, why are we now only hearing that there was a failed pilot and that this could have averted this disgraceful abuse of power and miscarriage of justice?
Minister.
Well, okay, thank her for her contribution. And I too, as I said, have many constituents contact me appalled by what they've seen on our televisions. And she's right to draw attention. This wasn't the first time this had been publicised. I think Nick Wallace's podcast, The Great Post Office Scandal, as well as his book that he wrote on it, is something very worth listening to, and it goes into these matters in even greater depth. So she's right to pay tribute to those broadcasts as well, and publications as well. All the questions she asks are valid questions. You know, when was this established? It was going on. Where were the checks and balances? Where were the duty of care? That's what the inquiry is there for. The inquiry was established after the court case, of course, and was subject to vigorous debate in this House about the type of inquiry it should be. It was ultimately settled upon that it should be a statutory inquiry. That's because it's greater powers that a statutory inquiry has. So it should be able to get to the bottom of those questions she asked, quite rightly. Once we've got to the bottom of those questions, then we can start to identify who is responsible, specifically for what, and make sure those people are held to account.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his work on this really important issue. It's a really heartbreaking story of injustice that I'm sure we'd all agree has been allowed to drag on for far too long now. It was incredibly heartening for me to see so many constituents moved by the powerful ITV dramatisation to write to me about this injustice and ask me what I'd be doing about it as their MP. But it was also tragic to see that it had to come to this after years of powerful and brave campaigning by some of those postmasters affected. We owe it to them to act with the urgency this situation requires. And so I'd like to ask the Minister, while I acknowledge that he set out some challenges to giving certainty around timelines today, can he at least provide a timeline when we will be able to say with certainty everyone will have received compensation where affected and all of those wrongfully convicted will have had their convictions overturned? Alongside that, accountability is such an important issue here, and I welcome some details from him on how he'll be working with colleagues right across the House to make sure all of those accountable, including Fujitsu, are held to account.
Well, I thank you for his contribution. I agree with this has taken too long to get to this point in time, and if it wasn't for people like Alan Bates, of course, some of the journalists involved that we referred to earlier, but people also like Lord Arbuthnot and the Right Honourable Member for North Durham and many others, this may have never come to light. So, but it has taken too long. We need to act with pace as quickly as possible to expedite many things here, as we have referred to already. Overturning convictions, of course. We're keen to do that very quickly. That may require legislation, and I'm sure we'll get support on both sides of the House if any legislation we may need. But we are keen, in terms of timelines, it's right to push us on timelines. As we have said, we are keen to deliver compensation wherever possible by August of this year. And certainly so overturning convictions as rapidly as possible, and we'd like that ideally to take weeks, not months, to do that, but that obviously will rely on a number of will be dependent upon a number of different factors. But the compensation itself, we for all those three schemes, the first scheme is practically been delivered for the people that applied within the timescale, appropriate timescale. 2,417 people, 100% of those people have been made offers, 85% of people have accepted. The remaining schemes, there are some people that applied out of time, so we're working on those applications right now and hope to deliver those as quickly as possible. I think 75% of those have been made offers, but then we're left with the scheme, the GLO scheme and the overturning conviction scheme, which I say we hope to deliver that, including the overturning convictions, certainly by August of this year, if not far sooner than that.
Just to say, I think this was a very important debate and it was much needed. Can I say thank you to the Minister for taking and staying at the dispatch for so long. I'm going to say thank you also to ITV, because they've certainly made the country aware of this absolute scandal against innocent people.